You're listening to the N2K Space Network.
And now a word from our sponsor, the Data Citizens Dialogues podcast. As a listener of this podcast, you're probably at least marginally interested in data, especially about all the different ways that it shapes our world. So I want to recommend the Data Citizens Dialogues podcast. This is a forward-thinking show brought to you by the folks at Calibra. They are the leaders in data intelligence. You're going to hear firsthand from all sorts of people, industry titans, innovators, executives from some of the largest companies as they dive into the hottest topics in data. You're going to get insights into everything from popular things such as AI governance and data sharing down to more nuanced questions like how do we ensure data readability at a global scale? So, while data may be shaping our world, Data Citizens Dialogue is shaping the conversation. I want to encourage you to follow Data Citizens Dialogue on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check it out. We thank Data Citizens Dialogue for sponsoring our show.
There was a special delivery to space by Roscosmos yesterday, courtesy of both Russia and its new BFF, Iran. How many satellites can a Soyuz-class spacecraft get into orbit at once, do you think? Okay, that's perhaps an unfair question, as it depends on the kinds of satellites, of course, but what do you think? How many dozens are we talking here? Well, we'll tell you in the top story.
T-minus 20 seconds to LOS speed rest. Go for deploy. Roger roll.
Today is November 6, 2024. I'm Maria Varmazis, and this is T-minus. Russia launches 53 satellites to space, including 2 Iranian spacecraft. Redwire receives the third batch of pharmaceutical drug crystals from space. KT, KTSat, and KAI to collaborate on satellite projects. And our guest today is Sam Wilson, Senior Policy Analyst for the Center for Space Policy and Strategy at the Aerospace Corporation. And we're going to be discussing his chapter on finance from the Aerospace Corp's Space Agenda 2025. Stick around for that chat later in the show. It is Wednesday. Let's dive into today's Intel briefing. The Russian Space Agency said a Soyuz 2.1 spacecraft launched on Tuesday from Vostochny, carrying 53 satellites to orbit. Of those, the satellites included 2 Russian Ionosphere M Earth observation satellites and 2 Iranian-made satellites. Iranian state news said these 2 satellites are the nation's first private sector-made spacecraft. This marks the 3rd time that Russia has launched satellites for Iran, and Russia's continued launch support for Iran is part of an ongoing, comprehensive strategic partnership between the 2 nations. Redwire says their 3rd batch of pharmaceutical drug crystals grown in space have successfully returned to Earth. The returned samples include crystals being studied by Eli Lilly and Company using Redwire's Pillbox platform. Lilly researchers are using this experiment to potentially accelerate the discovery of novel medicines to treat chronic diseases. And this is the part where we all get very excited about how microgravity environments can improve medicine for crewmates on planet Earth. One of the experiments built upon earlier research that concluded that insulin crystals grown in microgravity are larger and more ordered than those grown on Earth. It successfully crystallized the same insulin experiments flown as part of a previous investigation to demonstrate consistent, repeatable results. Korea Telecom, or KT, has signed a memorandum of understanding with KTSat and Korea Aerospace Industries to partner on 6G and low Earth orbit satellite projects. The 3 companies plan to jointly pursue domestic and international projects, including the deployment of 6G LEO communication satellites and the establishment of integrated manned and unmanned systems. Is it a bird? Is it a plane? Is it a starship? No, it's China's new Long March 9 spacecraft, But you'd be forgiven for thinking that it was a replica for SpaceX's Super Heavy Lift vehicle. China has unveiled the latest specifications of the Long March 9 rocket, which plans to have a fully reusable first stage powered by 30 YF-215 engines. The new design also includes a fully reusable configuration of the rocket with an upper stage that looks very similar to Starship's second stage, complete with flaps in similar locations. According to a recent presentation at an air show, China intends to fly this vehicle for the first time in 2033. Earlier this week, China's Shenzhou 18 spacecraft returned to Earth with the 3-man crew on board, but it also carried 34.6 kilos of space station experimental samples. Chinese media say the samples are poised to advance the development of space fiber lasers, facilitate the creation of extraterrestrial materials, and explore the prospects of Earth life spreading throughout the cosmos. Some of the returned samples are high-temperature resistant alloys, fiber optics, and optical coatings. The spacecraft also returned nanoparticles derived from methane combustion that are intended to facilitate the future synthesis of critical particulate materials for extraterrestrial environments. Say that 5 times fast. We are expecting China to share some of the results of the 28 experiments in the coming months. Lithuania-based satellite manufacturer Nano Avionics says one of its satellites has collided with space debris. The discovery was made after the MP-42 satellite took an image of its solar panel, which then revealed a 6-millimeter hole. Nano Avionics shared that this space debris or micrometeoroid impact would have been left unnoticed if not for MP-42's selfie camera. But 2 questions still remain unanswered: when the impact occurred and what caused it. Fortunately, the hole is so small that it caused no measurable drop in the solar panel's electricity output. A new report from the National Academies has concluded that engineers missed the warning signs ahead of the collapse of the Arecibo radio telescope in Puerto Rico in 2020. The report found that the collapse was caused by failures of cable sockets that supported the platform above the dish due to accelerated zinc creep. I do not know what that means either. Structural engineers who inspected the cables and sockets missed warning signs, especially after winds from Hurricane Maria, no relation, placed extra stress on the cables. The authors also speculate that the electromagnetic environment may have been a contributing factor. The report, Failure Analysis of the Arecibo Observatory 305-meter telescope collapse, presents lessons learned and makes recommendations to help ensure the safe operation of other unique, critical science facilities. And that concludes our briefing for today. You'll find 3 additional articles in the selected reading section of our show notes. One is on the latest Minuteman III ICBM test, another's on Teledyne's latest acquisition, and a third's on laser welding in space. Yes, laser welding in space. All those links and more can be found on our website, space.n2k.com, and just click on this episode title. Hey T-Minus crew, if you find this podcast useful, please do us a favor and share a 5-star rating and short review in your favorite podcast app. It'll help other space professionals like you to find the show and join the T-Minus crew. Thank you so much for your support, everybody. We really appreciate it.
The IT world used to be simpler. You only had to secure and manage environments that you controlled. Then came new technologies and new ways to work. Now, employees, apps, and networks are everywhere. This means poor visibility, security gaps, and added risk. That's why Cloudflare created the first-ever connectivity cloud. Visit cloudflare.com to protect your business everywhere you do business.
Our guest today is Sam Wilson, and he's the Senior Policy Analyst for the Center for Space Policy and Strategy at the Aerospace Corporation. And Sam co-authored a chapter in the Aerospace Corporation's Space Agenda 2025 report on financial forecasting for the space industry. And I asked Sam to start off by telling us more about the chapter that he contributed to.
One thing that's really interesting is, that chapter it's mostly, I'd say, a diagnosis of the challenge and opportunity presented to the Department of Defense, looking at some of the financial trends over the last several years, but also beyond that. And you can see we have a couple graphics that show that 2021, from 2008 to 2021, venture capital investment steadily rose until it hits this huge peak, which is a peak even looking beyond 2008, looking decades, huge amount of venture capital investment, and then it fell pretty precipitously from 2021 and 2023. And so you have this on the venture capital side. Again, the venture capital investment has dropped over 50 or dropped nearly 50% from 2021 to 2023. And it's not just venture capital that you see this trend. Another way you can see this is SPACs. I think SPACs is like one of those terms that actually the acronym makes more sense than the full definition, the special purpose acquisition companies. But a lot of space companies went public through SPACs, and those also had this huge jump in 2020, 2021, and then from there they fell 97%. So what you're really seeing is a ton of capital that was available and that was relatively cheap going into 2020, 2021 in the pandemic, and then falling really precipitously. So that definitely impacted commercial space companies who benefited from this really unique investment environment, both in the public and private markets in that 2020 to 2021 period.
Sounds like in the context of, when we're talking about this set of papers for talking about policy moving forward in the upcoming year with the upcoming administration, sounds like there's an opportunity there, given the sort of the gap that maybe this is where the DoD and the federal government can come in and be that financial bright spot that many of these private companies are really needing right now.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think for the other part of the context here is that the Department of Defense and other agencies within the U.S. government have been saying for a long time, including in policy directives going back to the early 90s, if not the 80s, saying that we need to use commercial space to a much greater extent. And we really need to use the commercial space services. And now, because of this very exceptional investment environment that led to a lot of commercial space companies receiving a lot of investment, now there's so much commercial space capability that the U.S. government could leverage, could use, could buy services from. And this is really valuable, I think, from an acquisition perspective, because this is a lot buying something that exists versus building something from scratch is a lot less expensive, right? The U.S. government didn't have to pay the development costs of a lot of these commercial space firms, but now it can take advantage of those services that they provide. And so from an acquisition perspective, I think it just makes a lot of sense. And then from an industrial policy perspective, it makes sense too, because you have all these U.S. companies that are now in a different investment environment. And for a lot of these capabilities, there aren't really commercial markets yet that are mature. And so they really need revenue. And so, I think one of the things that we say that may be provocative is that, in the absence of government revenue, a lot of these companies may not survive. And I just think that's important because, from the Department of Defense perspective, a lot of these firms are offering services that are really valuable to them now and in the future. And so they should try to take actions now to prevent that.
I don't know if this makes sense in the context of the work here, but I'm curious. So we've talked a bit about sort of the upsides for the government to be, and I'm borrowing language from the paper, it sounds like an anchor tenant in a lot of these in these companies. What are the downsides or possible risks, though, in this situation? This is just a curiosity thing on my part. Don't know if that's relevant, but I would imagine risk is part of the calculus here.
Absolutely. There are significant trade-offs here. And, and I think the trade-offs are what most people talk about with respect to being like the anchor tenant or like the biggest customer for a commercial firm. And which is why in the paper we wanted to say like, hey, we're going to defend actually the case of being anchor tenant, right? Which I think is which is often used as sort of a pejorative term, because is it really commercial if most of the revenue is coming from government? I think our point is that the risk here, if you don't do this, or if you have a hard rule against it, again, is that these firms, many of these firms that you want to leverage may not exist. If you say we're only going to
Fair enough.
provide 20% of the revenue, and so I think that to me that's really an important point to underline under all this. But yeah, sure, there's definitely trade-offs. Other people have pointed out that you're distorting the market, right? If the government is providing a lot of revenue to individual companies, and you're picking winners and losers, right? In some respects, I just think, given how much investment went into this, that it just behooves the government to do this now, right? Because the truth is that there's so much capability that exists, and I think what they should prioritize is trying to ensure that the really compelling services continue to exist, rather than trying to think about, are we distorting the market? To me, the market was already distorted because, again, it was this incredibly unique investment environment. So, that's my view on this. But definitely, there are trade-offs. And I mean, the truth is that you can still be anchor tenant, and the commercial firm may still fail, right? And you could be anchor tenant, and a commercial market may never develop. One of the analogs we use in the paper is the aviation industry before World War II was reliant on government airmail contracts. That was a case, of course, when a commercial market developed, but a commercial market may not develop. A sizable commercial market might not develop in some of these areas. I still think it's worth it to be the anchor tenant, because again, the trade-off should be, how expensive would this be for me to build from scratch, rather than for me to be anchor tenant for 10 to 20 years. And I think you're still going to see that on that equation, it's still preferential to be an anchor tenant.
Yeah, and in some cases, if the government may be the sole tenant, but that does happen sometimes. But sometimes that is the necessary thing. I could totally see that. So a lot of what you've been mentioning here, I have to ask, because the election, it does sound pretty administration agnostic. Does this specific conversation really matter when it comes to the specific president in power? Is, I think, the question I'm trying to ask. Or is this completely agnostic depending on who's in there?
It obviously depends on who is going to fill out some of those leadership positions in the agencies that have kind of space equity, and then the agencies that we're talking about. But this is a bipartisan objective to use commercial space to a greater extent. And we can see that, again, in how policy directives from the White House have been calling for this across administrations, both Republican and Democrat. So, I don't see any difference. I think this should be something, though, that the next administration should consider pressing. I mean, with respect to space issues, I think you have all this great commercial capability, and you can extract a lot of value from it, and also you can benefit the U.S. industrial base in a really significant way. So, to me, it really it should be something that the next administration really thinks about seriously.
We'll be right back.
And now, a word from our sponsor, NordPass. NordPass is an advanced password manager from the team behind NordVPN, designed to help keep your business safe from data leaks and cyber threats. It gives your IT professionals control over who has access to your company's data, and makes it easy for everyone else on your team to use strong passwords. Right now, you can go to www.nordpass.com/cyberwire for 35% off the NordPass Business Yearly Plan. Don't miss out on that.
Welcome back. So many sci-fi classics involve humanity trying to figure out a message sent to us from the great unknown. Should intelligent life exist outside of Earth and wish to speak with us, would we ever have a chance of understanding one another? Would it be more of a contact situation or an arrival situation? How do we know if humanity would maybe be up to the task of intergalactic communication without a Babelfish? Well, last year, a number of space organizations, including ESA and who else but the SETI Institute, decided to try and see if we could test ourselves and figure this all out. In A Sign in Space, which is a project by media artist Daniela DePaulis, a simulated message from an extraterrestrial source gets picked up by an ESA spacecraft, and then it's all up to us to crowdsource what it means. But as a steganographer can tell you, finding information in the raw data is one task, but making sense of it all is another. True to form, 10 days after the project started, project participants sussed out the signal from the noise, but figuring out what the actual message was, well, that took an entire year, which honestly to me is kind of impressive on a number of fronts. ESA announced on October 22nd that a father-daughter team from the United States were the two that decoded the message, which was an image of 5 amino acids. So that's another piece of the puzzle placed. But what is the intent here? That part is still in progress. Intrigued? There is a Discord server for anyone who wants to participate in this really cool simulation. Maybe you'll be the one who figures out what it all means. And that's it for T-Minus for November 6, 2024, brought to you by N2K Cyberwire. For additional resources from today's report, check out our show notes at space.n2k.com. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. You can email us at space@n2k.com or submit the survey in the show notes. Your feedback ensures we deliver the information that keeps you a step ahead in the rapidly changing space industry. N2K Strategic Workforce Intelligence optimizes the value of your biggest investment, your people. We make you smarter about your team while making your team smarter. This episode was produced by Alice Carruth. Our associate producer is Liz Stokes. We are mixed by Elliot Peltzman and Trey Hester, with original music by Elliot Peltzman. Our executive producer is Jennifer Iben. Our executive editor is Brandon Karpf. Simone Petrella is our president, Peter Kilpie is our publisher, and I am your host, Maria Varmazes. Thanks for listening. We will see you tomorrow.